Hey guys, Ken Penders has decided to give us yet another treat this time with his newest release called The Shadow Files. So, as you can imagine, if you haven't heard, this is basically the very beginning of Shadow within the Archie comics. And I dug through a little bit of it. It does seem to be all of it, at least all of what he included when he originally was with Archie. And it's very fascinating, a lot of what this is like saying and not saying at the same time, because there's actually a lot of what's the word? Like a lot of text here of just Ken and his co-workers sort of just talking about the situation, not just with Shadow, but also surrounding Archie as a whole, which is very interesting, the kind of things that are going on in here. So I got the camera set up in the back. I'm going to get started. We're going to dig into this book a little bit more in depth than the last time I did something like this, hopefully. So let's just give it a shot, shall we? Pardon the everything, folks, but this should be a good enough setup for what we need to do here. So yeah, Shadow Files, this is actually, I believe, the variant cover. The other cover, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'll put it up on screen somewhere here for comparison. But yeah, just a redraw of the Shadow the Hedgehog cover. I got nothing else to say. This is the Ken Pender special at this point. What can I say? So, opening it up here, there's a little collage of Shadow's covers and all that. So, this is the first thing that kind of piqued my interest here. Looking through the copyright stuff, we have, copyright floating on in productions, all that, color editor, production artist, yada, yada, yada. You go down here, right? It's giving us the copyright list of the artist and the original writer. So we have Patrick Spaziante and Cara Bowlers, who wrote Sonic Adventure 2 story, for example. All are copyrighted by their respective artists. Copyright Cara Bowlers for Sonic Adventure 2. Here's the weird part about this. This book also includes Sonic Universe 2. And that was written by Ian Flynn and Tracy Yardley, did the art. They're not in the copyright here. So what piqued my interest here ultimately was that, okay, we know from the lawsuit, right? We know from the lawsuit, Ken and all the other people who've ever worked on Archie effectively own their copyright to their stories. I don't know for sure about the art, but I know the writers apparently now retain the rights to their stories. So this kind of begs the question, what does it say about Ian and his work with Archie? Did he surrender his copyright claim at some point? I assume maybe to Sega or something like, I don't know. It's weird. And for the record, there are some other writers involved with the Sonic Adventure 2.5 as well. They're not credited here either. So it's just, I don't know. It's just a weird thing that stood out to me that Ian Flynn, who ostensibly, according to the lawsuit, owns his work through Archie, is not listed here in the credits. That's fascinating. And for the record, also, I should also point out that Ian, I believe on his podcast at one point, maybe it was during a live stream, he was asked, hey, about this Shadow Files reprint and about the fact that the Universe number 2 is included in here, about, hey, what's the deal? Did you give Ken Penders permission? And I don't know if the question was worded exactly like that, but effectively Ian's answer was like, I have nothing to do with this. I don't know anything about this, and just left it at that. So that goes to show something. I don't know. It's a very weird thing. It's a weird thing all around here. Of course, we have the table of contents here, and this is another story I'll have to get into here, but regardless, more table of contents stuff, yada, yada, yada. So the first little prelude here, and there are two of them here to talk about sort of what happened here with Shadow and how Shadow got introduced to the Archie comics. And this is something that I've covered in the podcast before, so I'm not going to repeat too much of it here. But the gist is that Sonic Adventure 2 was coming out. They had no means or ways of getting the story because Sega was not cooperating with them. However, the interesting thing here is that I believe Ken says somewhere around here that Sega of America, Sonic Team USA, was developing Sonic Adventure 2 in San Francisco. So in theory, Ken says, it should be easy to get information from them to make the Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation that Sega wants. And also, this is another thing, maybe not in here, but in another one somewhere around here, where Ken talks about how Sega of Japan was not really willing to cooperate with them because they were afraid of leaks. So they did not want to give the material to Ken Penders and the Archie team as a whole, just to avoid any, any leaks through the system, which I guess is fair, all things considered. But also, wait a minute. I'm looking at this now for the first time. They just lifted the box art, didn't they? Yeah, this is just the box art. What the... you can very easily find, right? You can very easily find the, logo-less cover art if you just want Sonic and Shadow crossing. I'm gonna find you the logo-less copy right now. Boom. There it is. There you go. It's right there. It's not that hard to find it. That was a weird... I don't know if this is a stylistic choice or someone just got lazy, but that's very weird. Look, I don't know. This... You see? That's very weird. What's happening here? But regardless, interesting little piece here talking about how Spaziante went out of his way to import a copy of Phantasy Star Online 2 because it had, or is it 2? No, it's Phantasy Star Online 1 on the Dreamcast because it had a demo for Sonic Adventure 2. So, in retrospect, if I remember correctly, that little one story of a Sonic Adventure 2 for, I think it was issue 98 or something like that, Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation for Archie Comics was basically just Sonic going through City Escape. So if it's just the trial and it's just Sonic going through City Escape, alright, yeah, that makes sense. That's literally all they had to work with. That's great. That's awesome. And of course, Ken talks more about how, Shadow was never meant to be part of the series as a whole. He's just more beloved as time went on. Yada, yada, yada. We all know the story. Another interesting thing, though, is this story here, because this isn't really about Shadow, per se, but it's more so about Ken working with his contacts within Sega and talking about how the certain stories that he was asked to write for, and that's something I'm also going to talk about a bit later in this next piece here. This is Robert Leffler. This is basically Ken's sole contact within Sega of America, and the only person at the time who was basically willing to bat for him. He was the one trying his best to get Ken and the Archie team any kind of information about the games, or really just anything about how Sega works internally with Ken, and how they could work more closer together. And like I said, he was the only guy, and unfortunately, he had passed away suddenly due to cancer in August 2007. So, from Ken's perspective, and he goes through this here, he's talking about his one guy within Sega. He has a pretty good working relationship with him, probably the only good working relationship he has within Sega, and then out of nowhere, the guy just disappears on him, and he learns later on down the line that he unfortunately passed due to cancer. Very sad. That's very shocking as well. And also, he goes on here to say about how Robert Leffler's successor within Sega of America tried to work with Ken, but also did not at the same time, and that was part of one of the key reasons why Ken would later leave a few years later from this point. So, obviously, the timeline of him leaving, this had to do more so with the Sonic projects Ken wanted to work on, like that animated movie. I believe we talked about that in one episode of the podcast, maybe the last one or something. But yeah, very, very insightful. These are all very, very interesting because, Sega of Japan refused to turn anything over. Nothing. Yeah, and this also kind of coincides as well with what Iizuka has said about the comics in the past, or at least during this time. I remember Iizuka saying that he felt very frustrated that there was just no cohesion within the Sonic series at this time. Iizuka probably saw the American comics, the Archie comics, and was like, Jesus Christ, man, what's happening here? And probably just didn't want to cooperate with them because things just kind of went too far. It's like, you know what? We can't fix this. Let's just leave it alone. And maybe that was just his attitude. And whenever Sega just randomly decided to exert their influence and say, hey, can you give us adaptation for the new game? We're trying to make that. Okay, can we have any materials? Can we get something to work with here? They're like, what? Why would you ask that? That's crazy. Get out. Why are you still here? Get out. So I can understand Ken's frustration there, I suppose. So I'm just going to look through here, page through. These are all, this here is effectively just the reprint here. Reprints of Archie, I believe 198, this is 98, yada, yada, yada. Easy, simple stuff to look through. Nothing really too important to write home about here. Until we get to here. So yeah, logoless, or I guess the logo here, a Sonic Universe issue 2, again, written by Ian Flynn and art by Tracy Yardley. Ian said he had nothing to do with this. So this again begs the question, and we've asked this before, where is the legality in all this? Is Ken allowed to do this? I mean, ostensibly he is. I mean, does this thing exist? We can't say that he can't, I guess. At least Sega doesn't seem to have said anything, or he hasn't commented on it at least. And that's kind of the weird thing here about all this, is that we're going to keep asking ourselves, what's the legality of it? Where's everything going to fall through? And you know what? I don't think we're ever going to get an answer to that, and I think we just have to live with it. We just have to live with the fact that there's just this giant walking question mark through the series, and until, I don't know, maybe some lawyer who used to work at Archie during this time, who has, like, since retired, and, like, is just days away from the nursing home, is like, what are they gonna do, sue me? I'll go tell someone something. And actually, that was also a big piece that I'm going to talk about later, is the role of Mike Pellerito. The role of Mike Pellerito in all this is that he was the editor between the time of, Ken leaving and then Ian coming on. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to skip to that right there. So, have a lot to go through here. The Sonic Adventure 2.5, all that stuff. So, okay. Here's a little weird thing. In this re-release, Ken decided to include a new original story that apparently was based on an old script that he had, and this was even intending what? This is also him, also I should say, this little excerpt here is just Ken talking about how much better he was working on in animation. Specifically says he got $2,000 a month from Archie in 2005, but made that much in a week working in animation. He mentions, I believe he worked on storyboards for King of the Hill, and I believe in another piece he mentions he also worked on some animated Bratz movies as well. Yeah, he kind of got a little radicalized there. Fair enough, cool. But here, this story here, as you can see, it's new art. Oh my god, is it new art? And Ken gave us this sort of, what was intended to be after all this, because all this book is effectively is just like the adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2, all those little bits and pieces. Oh, and I should also point out here, so if you remember, I don't know if I'm going to compare these, maybe I'll bring up the images here somewhere, but all these little panels here were flashbacks, if I believe, to the original story. So Ken just included the ones that were important for context, I suppose. Which, I mean, alright, fair enough, I guess, if that's how you want to do it. It's just excerpts from Universe 2, but still, either way here. This story here, Ken intended to be a follow-up to, I believe, Universe 2, or to Sonic Adventure 2.5 in 125. So, really, there is some weird things about this story here. So, as you can see here, this is effectively supposed to reveal that Hope Robotnik, Snively's cousin, I believe, was actually a clone of Maria. And that's just ridiculous. I mean, honestly, that's par for the course for Ken during this era. You're going to drop in that, say, oh yeah, Maria was cloned, or Maria's DNA was used and made Hope. Okay, Ken. Yeah, sure, buddy. Whatever you say, man. And again, Ken is in such a weird state here with that kind of revelation, because Shadow does not seem to be very perturbed by that. It's very odd. And there's some weird stuff going on here as well that I can't even really make out. I don't even really care to make it out, to be perfectly honest. Shadow saves the doctor who took Hope away, all that stuff, and then it was supposed to be a follow-up to the next story. I guess Shadow was doing a little adventure going to Angel Island looking for answers, as as one can expect, right? Yeah, this one is not really that interesting to me. That's whatever. Hope clone of Maria. Sure, whatever. This is what is the meat here. So, later on, Ken is going to explain a bit more about this in the book. But, before the release of this book, Ken effectively accused Ian of stealing a script that he made, that he submitted to Archie before he quit. That script obviously was rejected, according to him, 2 times over, because this is a first draft, and then he also included a second rewrite of it, and said both of them were rejected. And I'm not going to lie, looking through it, I see very well why it was rejected, because clearly the editor at the time, Mike Pellerito, was like actually giving a shit about quality control, and just sort of like, no, Ken, I cannot accept this. This is awful. Even though, like, I'm not gonna lie, it is kind of par for the course for the Mobius 25 years later story as well. So, what I'm getting at here is that this script, according to Ken, was taken or given to Ian and used that as a basis for the Mobius 25 years later stories that I believe are in issue 166 and 167, and I believe those are also included in here as well for good measure. Yeah, see? There you go. Angel Maria statue. Hilarious. So, look, Ken has decided to basically make this a read for yourself type situation. You be the judge, and you say whether or not Ken's accusation of Ian stealing his work for his epilogue in 166 and 167 is valid. And also, I should say, Ian has responded to the allegations, and he just said, no, I came up with that story on my own. Now, I have a little wrinkle here. The connecting thread here is the editor, Mike Pellerito. So, what I suspect the truth of the matter is, maybe Mike gave certain details to Ian and said, hey, why don't you try this out? Try including this in your story, and Ian followed through on it. Because I'm not going to lie, I read through this script here in its totality. And I am not going to lie, the only connecting thread here is that there's a King Shadow. So if you forget about Mobius 25 years later, which I don't blame you for, the end of that story was Sonic going back in time in some sort of time machine. And the pickup in this script is right after that, where Sonic, I guess, did what he needed to do in the past and came back with no memory. And he wakes up, sees Sally, is overjoyed to see Sally, and is shocked to learn that she ended up marrying Shadow. And Shadow is also written very out of character here. It's very... Look, that's another thing I should also comment, is that Ken does not know how to write Shadow at all. And you can make the argument that, Ken, there was really nothing to work on with Shadow anyway. They had no information. And, Shadow has kind of been developed into what he is now by Sega in a very particular way. So it's a little hard to, really square that and say, oh, he wrote him out of character when he didn't know what he was doing because he had no information. So I'm not going to harp on that too much, and I won't really blame Ken on that as well. I'm just saying, from my perspective, it's very jarring to see Shadow written in such a way. So where can a good example of this is, where is it? Yeah, see, here we go. I don't know if you can really make it out here. Sally finds Sonic and says he needs medical attention immediately. King Shadow wearing a crown more massive and masculine. Ken, you never fail to make me laugh. You never fail to make me laugh, Ken. Then one King Sonic was wearing blah, 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 blah. Anything were to happen, and Shadow comes in saying, not to worry, darling. Again, I don't think Shadow would say that. I don't think he'd say that. We really talk a lot, ultimately, about how, the Sonic characters, or Sonic in particular, is, not written in such a way where he says things that he normally wouldn't say. I don't really subscribe to a lot of that stuff, but, you really want to see Sonic and Shadow and other Sonic characters saying things that they actually genuinely would not say? Why don't you go find a classic Archie book and come back to me, buddy? Maybe you can see what we have to say about that. So looking through it again, my crux here is that, again, the only connecting thread between the final product that was in 166 and 167 is just that King Shadow is a thing and Sonic altered the past in some way. The exact wording here is the exact story that's being told here, much different, very, very bizarre on top of that too. I mean, all of this is. So I think that's kind of all I really have to say about this book, and just, oh, look at that. I don't know if you can really make it out. It says, he was originally Knuckles 2.0, only better. What more could I say, folks? What more could I say? So, I think this kind of speaks for itself at this point. This is all very, like, another bizarre installment in the Ken Penders Archie Sonic bootleg re-releases, all things considered. Alright, chat, so what have we learned today? Well, not much, considering that Ken has, you know, done it again. That's all I can really say, is that Ken Penders has done it again. What can we make of this? Honestly, not really a lot more than we already knew. There is some little tidbits of information here that I do think is interesting to look into a bit further. A little behind the scenes talk here. I wanted to reach out originally to Mike Pellerito to see if I could get some sort of definitive answer on whether or not Ken's accusation actually does hold any water, or if he's just misremembering stuff. But upon looking into him, it turns out that Mike Pellerito today is now the president of Archie Comics. So I do not think he will be very willing to talk about really anything regarding Ken Penders on the record. So maybe we'll revisit this topic in like 15 years and get an answer whenever he eventually retires. That aside, though, yeah, I don't really think Ken has a leg to stand on in regards to this accusation, because if you actually like go through that script, the only thing that connects this is the King Shadow concept. There's even one thing I didn't even mention, is that there's even that Sally and Shadow have kids. I didn't talk about that when I was looking through the book, but yeah, they have 3 daughters. Their daughters are Alicia, Juliana, and Maria. Alicia and Juliana are twin sisters that look exactly like Sally, and Maria looks exactly like Shadow. Again, reading through that script, I can see in my mind's eye the art. I don't know who it would have been done by. It doesn't matter who it would have been done by. I can see exactly how this is all supposed to look. Which, you know what? Maybe that goes to his skills, Ken Penders' skills, as a comic book artist. Truly, I can visualize what Ken Penders is putting on the page alone. And you know what? To that I say, bravo, 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 Mr. Penders. I guess with all that being said, a little interesting deep dive in this look through here. And as far as the price goes, this cost $75. This book did. I'm not gonna repeat myself necessarily on the pricing of it all, because again, Ken's one guy. He has just only his own operation to run through, so it's priced in such a way where it reflects that, an indie developer, if you will. In fact, let me show y'all something. So what I got is the Invincible Omnibus. This is the newest one that came out a couple months ago. This cost like $125 on Amazon, I believe. Let me show you how thick it is. This is about 1,200 pages for $125. So for $50 more, I get a lot more, a lot more in content. Now, again, like I said before, I don't think it's a fair comparison to make with an indie publisher, if you want to go that far, an indie publisher like Ken Penders versus, Image Comics, a established name in the comic book industry that can very easily print these out fast and relatively cheap, right? So I get it. Well, that's all I really have to say for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, check out the Patreon, patreon.com/SonicSpeed. We got a whole bunch of stuff on offer there. Go down below. Yeah, that's it. See you guys. Have fun. Good night.